The history textbook slipped from Maya's fingers and hit the linoleum floor with a slap that echoed in the silent classroom. Every head turned toward her, but her eyes were locked on Mrs. Davison, whose finger was now pointing directly at Maya's chest. "Empty your pockets, Maya. Right now," the teacher demanded, her voice cold and sharp in the humid room, publicly branding her a thief before she could even speak. Just an hour before, the world had felt normal. Maya had been sitting in this very seat, tracing the engraved letters on her best friend Chloe's new necklace, a delicate silver initial C on a thin chain. It was a birthday gift from Chloe's grandmother, and she'd been showing it off all morning, beaming with pride. "It's real silver," she'd whispered, leaning over from her desk next to Maya's. "Don't let it get tangled in your hair." Maya had laughed, a genuine, easy sound. She and Chloe had been inseparable since 3rd grade, a duo everyone knew. Chloe, vibrant and popular. Maya, quiet and artistic, her sketchbook a constant companion. Their friendship was the one thing at Oakwood Academy that made Maya feel like she belonged, a feeling she guarded fiercely. The class had filed out for recess, a chaotic stream of backpacks and laughter. In the rush, Chloe had been called to the office. In her haste, she'd fumbled with the necklace's clasp, finally just pulling it over her head and shoving it into the messy open mouth of her backpack. "Guard it with your life," she'd joked to Maya before disappearing out the door. Maya had stayed behind for a moment to finish shading a drawing. As the room emptied, she saw it. The silver chain, slithering out from Chloe's bag like a tiny, gleaming snake, catching the light before it fell silently to the floor. With a sigh, thinking she was saving Chloe from a panic, Maya had bent down, picked it up, and slipped it into the front pocket of her hoodie for safekeeping. She'd return it the second Chloe got back, but then the fire drill had happened. The blaring alarm, the frantic lines, the long wait out on the sunny athletic field. In the commotion, returning the necklace had completely slipped her mind. Now, back in class, Chloe was in tears, claiming her precious gift had been stolen from her bag. Mrs. Davison, with the grim efficiency of a detective on a late-night show, had decided to investigate, and her investigation began and ended with the quiet black girl who looked guilty because she'd gone pale and hadn't said a word. The necklace felt like a lead weight in Maya's pocket. She could feel its outline through the fabric. All she had to do was pull it out, explain the misunderstanding, and this would all be over. But the words wouldn't come. Mrs. Davison's accusing eyes, the stares of her classmates, they saw a thief, not a friend trying to help. To speak now felt impossible. Her silence wasn't guilt, but it was about to betray her completely. Stay with this story if you want to understand the heavy cost of a secret kept for all the wrong reasons. The necklace in her pocket was no longer a piece of metal. It was a pulsating, radioactive core of shame. Maya could feel every intricate curve of the C, every link of the chain, branding her through the fabric of her hoodie. Mrs. Davison's command to empty her pockets hung in the air. A trap she had walked right into. "Just take it out," a voice screamed inside her head. "Just say you were keeping it safe. It's simple. It's the truth." But her body refused to listen. Her hands were blocks of ice at her sides. Her throat had closed completely, sealed shut by a fear so profound it was dizzying. She saw the way Mrs. Davison was looking at her, not with curiosity, but with certainty. The teacher's eyes were narrowed, her lips a thin, disapproving line. She wasn't seeking an explanation. She was awaiting a confession. "I'm waiting, Maya," Mrs. Davison said, her voice dropping into a lower, more dangerous register. The classroom was so quiet, Maya could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights above. 30 pairs of eyes drilled into her, a jury that had already reached its verdict. I didn't," Maya stammered, but the words were a weak whisper, swallowed by the tense room. "You didn't what?" Mrs. Davison pressed, taking a step closer. "You didn't think anyone would notice? That a beautiful silver necklace could just go missing from your best friend's bag?" The misdirection was accidental but devastating. Chloe, from her desk, let out a fresh sob. The sound was a knife in Maya's heart. This was Chloe, her Chloe, who she'd had sleepovers with, who she'd told her secrets to. And now she was making her cry. "It's not in my pockets," Maya finally managed to say. the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. It was a pathetic, transparent deflection. She just needed time to think, to find a way to explain that wouldn't make her look guilty. Mrs. Davison's expression hardened into something truly frightening. "If you won't do it voluntarily, then we will do this the hard way. Empty your backpack onto your desk, now." The command brooked no argument. With trembling hands, Maya unzipped her main compartment. Her sketchbook, her pencil case, her neatly folded homework. She dumped it all onto the scratched wooden surface. Her private world spilled out for public scrutiny. Mrs. Davison stepped forward and began to sift through Maya's things with the end of a pen. "As if they were contaminated." "Please," Maya whispered, her eyes pleading. "I didn't take it." "Then you have nothing to worry about," Mrs. Davison replied coolly, not even looking at her. She tapped the sketchbook. "What's in here? Hiding something between the pages?" Humiliation burned through Maya's veins. Her sketches were her soul. Dreamy landscapes, detailed portraits of her family, studies of Chloe laughing. To have this woman violate that space was a unique kind of torture. She found nothing, of course. The teacher's eyes then fell on the front pocket of Maya's hoodie, the very pocket that held the damning evidence. Maya instinctively clutched at it. "What's in that pocket, Maya?" Mrs. Davison asked, her voice dripping with suspicion. "You've been holding on to it this whole time." "It's nothing," Maya said, her voice cracking. "It's just—" My hands were cold. It was the worst thing she could have said. A flimsy excuse on a warm spring day. A low murmur went through the classroom. She saw heads nodding, looks of confirmation exchanged between her classmates. She's lying. The truth, the simple, innocent truth, was now buried under a mountain of assumed guilt. She chanced to look at Chloe. She needed to see understanding in her friend's eyes, a flicker of their old connection. But Chloe's face was a mask of hurt and confusion. She wasn't looking at Maya like her best friend. She was looking at her like a stranger who had betrayed her. That look shattered something inside Maya. If Chloe didn't believe her, who would? This was why she couldn't speak. It wasn't just about the moment. It was about a lifetime of lessons learned from sideways glances, from store clerks who followed her, from news stories that flashed on the TV screen. It was the crushing weight of knowing that as a black girl, her actions would be interpreted through the darkest lens. A simple explanation would be seen as a crafted alibi. Helpfulness would be seen as cunning. Her truth would be twisted into a lie before it even left her mouth. The necklace in her pocket wasn't just a necklace anymore. It was every stereotype she had ever fought against, and she was holding it for safekeeping. "Since you're being uncooperative, you can sit in the chair at the front of the room," Mrs. Davison said, her tone final. "We will continue this discussion with Principal Higgins after class." The walk to the solitary chair at the front of the class was the longest and most exposed walk of her life. She could feel every single stare. She sat down, back straight, her hands folded in her lap to hide their shaking. The necklace felt like it was glowing, screaming its presence from her pocket. She was the exhibit, a cautionary tale put on display. The struggle was no longer about a misunderstanding. It was a battle for her very character, and from where she sat, utterly alone, she was losing. The clock above the whiteboard had become an instrument of torture. Each click of the second hand echoed in Maya's skull, marking another moment she was forced to sit in the blistering spotlight of shame. Mrs. Davison had resumed the history lesson, her voice artificially bright as she discussed the Treaty of Versailles. It was a surreal nightmare. To her left, the teacher pointed at maps of Europe. To her right, Maya sat as a living example of crime and punishment. Her classmates tried not to look at her, but their glances were like little stings, quick, sharp, and frequent. She kept her eyes fixed on a small chip in the wood of her desk, her vision blurring with unshed tears. The weight of the necklace in her pocket was unbearable, a secret that was slowly poisoning her from the inside out. She could feel the lump of it with every slight shift of her body, a constant, mocking reminder of her own cowardice. "Just say it," she begged herself, but the fear was a cage. Then a shadow fell across the doorway. Maya's heart leapt into her throat. Principal Higgins. The end had arrived, but the figure that appeared was both familiar and unexpected. It was Ms. Evans, the art teacher. She was a young, willowy woman who always smelled of turpentine and clay, her fingers usually stained with paint. She taught in a sun-drenched studio at the end of the hall, a world away from the rigid order of Mrs. Davison's history class. She stood there hesitantly, a stack of folders in her arms, her expression one of mild confusion as she took in the scene, a lesson proceeding with bizarre normalcy, and a student sitting in isolation at the front of the room, like a dunce. "Can I help you, Lena?" Mrs. Davison asked, her tone slightly irritated at the interruption. "Oh, sorry, Helen," Ms. Evans said, her voice soft. "I just had those permission slips for the gallery trip." Her eyes flickered to Maya, and for a heart-stopping second their gazes locked. Maya saw a flicker of something in the art teacher's eyes, not accusation, but curiosity, concern. Maya quickly looked down at her hands, her face burning. "Just leave them on the desk, thank you," Mrs. Davison said, dismissing her and turning back to the map. Maya's hope, so briefly ignited, sputtered and died. Miss Evans would leave. Everyone else did. She would deposit the forms and walk away, and Maya would be left alone again with her secret and her sentence. But Miss Evans didn't leave. She walked quietly to Mrs. Davison's desk and placed the folders down. Instead of turning to go, however, she lingered. She leaned against the edge of the desk, her arms crossed, and simply observed the room. Her presence was a soft, silent dissonance in the tense atmosphere. She wasn't a threat, she was a witness. Mrs. Davison tried to ignore her for a minute, but the weight of a silent observer became uncomfortable. "Was there something else, Lena?" she asked, a clear note of impatience in her voice. Ms. Evans pushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "I couldn't help but overhear some commotion earlier," she said, her tone light, almost conversational. "Is everything all right?" A tight, humorless smile stretched across Mrs. Davison's face. "Everything is under control. We had an incident of theft, but the matter is being handled." "Theft?" Miss Evans repeated, her eyebrows raising slightly. She looked around the room, her gaze once again landing on Maya, but this time it was thoughtful, assessing. "That's serious. It is, and we will be getting to the bottom of it with the principal shortly." Ms. Evans nodded slowly, as if processing this. She looked at Chloe, whose face was still red and splotchy from crying. Then her eyes returned to Maya, who felt like she was being seen for the first time all hour. Ms. Evans wasn't looking at a stereotype. She was looking at a girl who was terrified. "A silver necklace, wasn't it?" Ms. Evans asked, her voice still calm. "With the initial?" "Yes," Mrs. Davison said, her arms crossing. "A birthday gift. Taken from a student's bag." Ms. Evans made a small, non-committal sound. She paused, and the silence stretched, becoming heavy with unspoken questions. "Helen," she began, her voice dropping into a more confidential tone, though it was still audible in the quiet room. "I was in the hallway right before recess ended. I saw Chloe fumbling with that necklace at her desk. The clasp seemed to be giving her trouble. Maya's head snapped up. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. Mrs. Davison frowned. "Well, that's hardly relevant. The point is, it was in her bag, and then it wasn't." "Is it possible," Ms. Evans continued, her words careful and precise, "that it could have fallen out? These delicate chains, they can slip out of an overstuffed backpack so easily. I've lost a few that way myself." She offered a small, sympathetic smile. "It might be worth taking another look around Chloe's desk before we escalate things." It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a defense. It was simply the introduction of another possibility, a door to a different room that Mrs. Davison had refused to even acknowledge existed. It was a lifeline. Mrs. Davison's jaw tightened. She was being questioned in her own classroom, and she didn't like it. "The situation has been assessed. We don't need to look again." Ms. Evans's calm demeanor didn't falter. She finally pushed off from the desk and took a few steps toward the front of the room. She didn't look at Mrs. Davison anymore. She looked directly at Maya. Her expression was kind but serious. It was a look that said, "I see you. I see your fear. Now what is the truth?" "Maya," Ms. Evans said, her voice gentle but clear, "is there something you'd like to say? Sometimes when we're scared, we freeze up. We all do, but your voice matters. This is your chance to use it." It was the permission Maya didn't know she needed. It wasn't a command or an accusation. It was an offer. Ms. Evans's quiet confidence created a tiny, sacred space in the room where the truth felt like it might actually be safe to exist. Maya's eyes darted to Mrs. Davison's stony face, to Chloe's confused one, and finally back to Miss Evans's steady, waiting gaze. The art teacher gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. A single tear finally broke free and traced a hot path down Maya's cheek. She took a shaky, ragged breath, the first deep one she'd taken in an hour. Her hand, trembling violently, moved from her lap. Every eye in the room followed it as she slowly reached into the front pocket of her hoodie. The silence was absolute, heavier than any that had come before. Her fingers closed around the cool, familiar metal. She pulled it out. The delicate silver C dangled from its chain, spinning slowly, catching the fluorescent light for everyone to see. A collective gasp rippled through the classroom. Chloe's hands flew to her mouth. Mrs. Davison's eyes widened in shock. "I found it," Maya whispered, her voice hoarse but finally clear. "It fell on the floor when Chloe left. I picked it up to keep it safe for her. I was going to give it back. I swear!" She held it out, a silent offering of the truth she had carried all along. The turning point wasn't a dramatic confession. It was a simple, heartbreaking act of finally being seen and finally finding the courage to be seen. The necklace dangled from Maya's fingers, a silent, spinning accusation. It was no longer a secret. The truth was out, hanging in the air between her and everyone else in the room. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the faint metallic tink of the silver sea brushing against itself. Mrs. Davison's face underwent a slow, terrible transformation. The rigid certainty drained away, leaving behind a pale, flustered confusion. Her mouth opened, then closed like a fish gasping for air. She had been so publicly, so utterly wrong. The narrative she had built with such confident authority lay in ruins at her feet, and she had no idea how to proceed. Well, she stammered, her eyes darting from the necklace to Maya's face, then to Miss Evans's calm expression. You should have spoken up immediately, Maya. This whole misunderstanding could have been avoided. It wasn't an apology. It was a deflection, a feeble attempt to place the blame for the last hour of trauma back onto Maya's shoulders. You should have spoken up. The words should have stung, but to Maya they felt hollow. The power they'd held over her was gone. She had spoken up, finally. "I think," Ms. Evans said, her voice cutting through the teacher's discomfort with gentle firmness, "that the important thing is that Chloe has her necklace back, safe and sound, and that everyone now understands what truly happened." She didn't look at Mrs. Davison. She kept her eyes on Maya, giving her a small, reassuring smile. It was a gesture of solidarity that meant more than any forced apology ever could. Mrs. Davison, desperate to regain control of her classroom, cleared her throat. "Yes. Well, Maya, you may return to your seat." The dismissal was abrupt, devoid of grace. The walk back to her desk was different from the walk to the front of the room. The eyes following her were no longer accusing, but wide with shock and a dawning sense of collective guilt. She didn't look at any of them. She kept her gaze forward, her head high for the first time that hour. She placed the necklace gently on Chloe's desk as she passed. Chloe stared at it, then up at Maya, her expression a tangled knot of relief, confusion, and shame. You had it the whole time?" she whispered, her voice thick. Maya just nodded, unable to trust her voice. She slid into her seat, her body feeling both heavy and weightless. The rest of the history lesson was a blur of muffled sounds and meaningless words. She was back in her place, but she didn't belong here anymore. The trust that had glued her to this classroom, to her best friend, had been shattered. When the bell finally rang, it was a jarring, merciful release. Students scrambled to gather their things, eager to escape the uncomfortable atmosphere. Chloe hovered by her desk, the necklace clutched tightly in her hand. "Maya, she started, but the words wouldn't come. What could she say? "I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I'm sorry the teacher thought you were a thief." The chasm between them was too wide, too fresh, to be crossed with a simple apology. "It's okay," Maya said, the words automatic and empty. She shouldered her backpack and walked out into the hallway, leaving Chloe standing there. Alone with her guilt, she didn't get far. Ms. Evans was waiting for her just outside the door, leaning against the cool cinder block wall of the bustling hallway. "How are you holding up?" she asked. Her question wasn't the polite, casual kind adults usually asked. It was genuine. Maya shrugged, her eyes suddenly burning again. "I don't know," Ms. Evans nodded. "That was a very brave thing you did in there." "I wasn't brave," Maya whispered, looking at her shoes. "I was scared. I should have said something right away." "Maya, look at me," Ms. Evans said softly. When Maya looked up, the art teacher's expression was earnest. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's what happens despite the fear. You were carrying a tremendous weight in your pocket today, not just a necklace. The weight of knowing how people might see you. That is a burden no child should have to carry. You found your voice when it mattered most. That is bravery." Her words were a balm, washing away the residual sting of Mrs. Davison's blame. She wasn't a problem. She was a person who had faced an impossible choice. Why did you say something?" Maya asked. Miss Evans looked down the hall, her gaze thoughtful. "Because I've seen that look before. The look of someone who has a truth inside them that's too heavy to hold, but too terrifying to let out. Sometimes people just need a quiet reminder that they're not alone, that someone sees them." She gave Maya's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Your voice matters, Maya. Never let anyone make you feel like it doesn't. Now go on home." The walk home was a blur of green lawns and bright sunshine that felt incongruous with the storm inside her. When she pushed open her front door, the smell of home, of lemon polish and simmering spices, wrapped around her like a blanket. Her mother was in the living room, and just like before, she knew instantly. "Baby, what's wrong?" This time, Maya didn't cry. She was too drained for sobs. She walked over to the couch, sat down, and told the whole story in a flat, exhausted monotone. She told her about the necklace, the accusation, the public shaming, the terrifying silence. And then she told her about Miss Evans, the teacher who had stood in the doorway, the teacher who had seen her. Her mother listened, her face a storm of anger and heartbreak. When Maya finished, she pulled her into a fierce, tight hug. "Oh, my girl, my brave, brave girl." "I wasn't brave, Mom," Maya mumbled into her shoulder, repeating her words from the hall. "I was so scared." "I know," her mother whispered, rocking her gently. "And that's what makes it brave. You faced the thing that terrified you most, being misunderstood and judged, and you told your truth anyway." She pulled back, cupping Maya's face in her hands. "And that teacher? She was your reminder. In this world, you gotta look out for your reminders, baby. And you gotta promise me that one day, you'll be that reminder for someone else." Maya thought about the weight of the necklace in her pocket. She thought about the crushing weight of the silence. And then she thought about the profound, life-altering weight of being truly seen. The lesson wasn't about winning or losing. It was about the quiet courage it takes to speak a simple truth, and the even greater courage it takes to stand witness. To be the one who looks into a room filled with assumption and says, softly but firmly, "Wait, I see something else."